What if one day, without warning, every human on Earth lost the ability to speak? No illness, no war, no sign. Just silence. Absolute. Instant. People woke up to move their lips, and nothing came out. Babies cried in silence. News anchors opened their mouths and stared in horror. Airports fell into chaos. Hospitals froze. Governments collapsed. Voice assistants, phone calls, emergency systems, useless. The sound of the human voice gone. Forever? Or just taken? Scientists searched for answers. Was it a virus? A weapon? Divine punishment? Or something we invited ourselves? But what followed was far worse than silence. Because in that stillness, the truth began to whisper. Not through words, but through what remained. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. For as long as we've existed, the human voice has been our most powerful tool. Civilizations were built on language. Wars ended, or began, with a single speech. Every law, every lullaby, every scream for help, carried by breath and sound. In our world, speaking wasn't just communication. It was control, connection, survival. And by the mid-21st century, speech had become even more entwined with technology. Voice recognition ran our homes. Digital assistants answered every question. AI translated languages in real time. We spoke to machines, and they listened. Silence wasn't part of life anymore. Not in cities, not even in sleep. Every second of the day, something or someone was talking. The world had never been louder or more dependent on the sound of itself. Politicians gave daily live addresses. Influencers broadcasted their lives 24/7. People fell asleep to podcasts and woke up to alarms that said their name. Entire industries were built on voice, education, healthcare, security, and science. Science had mapped the vocal cords, synthesized speech, even replicated emotions in artificial voices. It felt like we had mastered sound, like we had claimed it forever. No one questioned how much we relied on our ability to speak, until the moment it vanished. One morning, no countdown, no signs. The world opened its mouth and found nothing there. The loss was not loud. It was a disappearance. A vanishing act so clean, so unnatural, it felt orchestrated. But by whom? Or what? And why? The silence didn't begin with panic. It began with disbelief. And in those first quiet hours, no one knew whether to fear what had been lost or what had just been found. It didn't start with an explosion. No virus spreading on maps. No warning from the sky. Just a single morning when 8 billion voices went missing. At first, scientists assumed it was psychological, mass hysteria triggered by an unknown event. But the scans told a different story. Vocal cords? Intact. Brains? Normal. The physical ability to speak remained, yet no sound came out. Something had severed the final connection, the invisible thread between thought and sound. And no one could explain how. Universities across the globe launched emergency studies. AI systems attempted to simulate speech patterns based on past recordings, but even synthetic voices began to fail. One by one, systems that relied on human speech shut down: voice authentication, air traffic control, medical voice assistants. What remained was only written words and frantic gestures. But language without sound felt hollow, emotionless. Something vital had been stripped away. Panic set in within days. Not because people couldn't speak, but because no one knew why. Some blamed solar flares. Others said it was an undiscovered neurovirus, too advanced to detect. A few whispered of dark energy, a shift in quantum reality. One theory went viral in the silent networks of the web. Humanity had reached a tipping point. That nature, or something beyond it, had pressed mute on the species that refused to be quiet. And then came the first clue. A research lab in northern Greenland, buried beneath ice, detected a spike. A pulse, faint but deliberate. Like a signal. And that signal didn't come from Earth. Suddenly, it wasn't just about speech. It was about contact, suppression, and the terrifying possibility that someone or something had been listening all along and finally decided it was our turn to be silent. By week 2, silence had a shape, a weight. Streets were no longer filled with voices, laughter, arguments, or songs. Only the mechanical hum of machines, the shuffle of feet, the occasional sob, stifled. Emergency broadcasts played subtitles. World leaders released statements with blank expressions and moving lips. Entire cities moved like mimes, trapped in invisible boxes of confusion. But researchers kept digging. Around the globe, sound labs activated old seismic microphones used to detect infrasonic waves. And they found something unsettling. A global tremor, barely perceptible, had occurred just seconds before speech disappeared. It wasn't an earthquake. It had no epicenter. It was everywhere, all at once. And more disturbing, there were faint echoes of it repeating, every 6 hours. As if something was maintaining the silence. Not a one-time event, an ongoing force. In Geneva, neurologists discovered a curious phenomenon. Patients placed under deep sedation could whisper in their dreams, but only then. Monitors recorded brain activity identical to vocalization, but the sound existed only in REM sleep. It was as if the voice had been relocated, separated. Meanwhile, social breakdown accelerated. In hospitals, doctors struggled to comfort dying patients. In schools, children grew anxious and unresponsive. Relationships strained. Mental health plummeted. Entire cultures, those built around oral tradition, began to fracture. Suicide rates rose by 38% globally within the first month. Protests erupted, silent yet furious. People wrote messages like "Give it back" across buildings, billboards, highways. But give what back? No one knew who to blame or where to look. And the deeper the world searched, the more coordinated the silence began to feel. Not random, not natural. Something had reached in and pulled the sound from our throats, and it wasn't done yet. The breakthrough came not from a government lab, but from a private research station in the Atacama Desert, where atmospheric physicist Dr. Mira Saito had been studying ionospheric anomalies. What she found rewrote everything. Just hours before humanity lost its voice, Earth's upper atmosphere registered a sudden, uniform shift in a narrow electromagnetic frequency, one previously thought to be background noise. But when amplified, the signal revealed an unmistakable pattern, a pulse. Not random, not natural. It was linguistic, a form of language, just not ours. It had structure, repetition, rhythm, like a message encoded in the fabric of the sky itself. But here's the terrifying part. The frequency matched the human vocal range almost exactly, as if it had overwritten us, silenced us, to speak instead. Dr. Saito called it a frequency hijack, a theoretical concept never observed before. Think of it like this. If sound is a broadcast, our voices were the signal. But now, something else was broadcasting louder. And we were muted, like static drowning out a whisper. Some scientists speculated it was interdimensional interference. Others believed it was a form of sentient sound, something alive that existed only as vibration. More extreme theories claimed humanity had spoken too much, too loudly, for too long, and something finally answered, not with words, but with silence. A silence so complete, so engineered, it had to be intentional. And if the atmosphere itself was now the medium for this unknown voice, what was it trying to say? Or worse, to whom? Because maybe this wasn't a message for us at all. Maybe we were just in the way. In the aftermath of global silence, the brightest minds on the planet converged in what became known as the ECHO Initiative, an unprecedented alliance of scientists, engineers, cryptographers, and even philosophers. Their mission: understand the signal and fight the silence. Quantum linguists developed machines capable of analyzing the atmospheric pulses in real time. What they found was staggering. The signal was not static, it was evolving, adapting. Every attempt to replicate human speech, even synthetically, was absorbed into it, like the silence was listening and reshaping itself. Advanced AI systems, trained on every known human language, tried to decode the pattern, but even they failed. The deeper they listened, the more erratic their responses became. Some systems began generating disturbing output, fragmented phrases, warnings, even what looked like begging. "Stop speaking," one program printed repeatedly. Another wrote, "You are not meant to answer." Meanwhile, bioengineers attempted to rewire the vocal system, bypassing the brain's traditional pathways. In rare cases, test subjects could produce faint, dissonant sounds, but they didn't match any known vocal pattern. The sounds made animals panic. Machines malfunctioned. The subjects themselves reported hearing voices in their heads, not their own. whispers, commands. Some had to be sedated. It became clear this wasn't just about speech, it was about ownership of sound itself. One tech consortium proposed launching vocal signals into deep space, a sort of reverse beacon. But the risk? Provoking a response. A louder silence. So now, science stands at a paradox: advance too far, and the silence tightens its grip. Stay still, and humanity may forget it ever had a voice. In the quiet hum of data centers and observation stations, one question echoes louder than any scream. Is it watching us wait? As months passed, and silence became the new air we breathed, the world stopped asking what happened and started arguing why. Competing theories erupted across underground networks, digital blackboards, encrypted think tanks. Some blamed it on our obsession with noise, the constant, aggressive saturation of sound humanity poured into the world. That maybe Earth itself retaliated. An ancient, planetary immune response. Others insisted it was artificial, a side effect of quantum experiments gone wrong. One whistleblower claimed the Large Hadron Collider had breached a vibrational boundary, releasing something that didn't belong here. Something that feeds on frequency. But not all theories were scientific. Theologians spoke of divine judgment, not by fire or flood, but by silence. That in a world where truth was drowned by endless words, silence was mercy or punishment. A few even believed this was evolution, that humanity had reached a communicative saturation point, and something higher had intervened to force adaptation, to strip away voice and awaken a deeper language, one beyond sound. But every theory came with a cost. The Echo Initiative lost researchers, some vanished. Others went mad. Governments shut down open investigation. Fear of provoking another event was too high. And here lies the core of it all. Progress always has a shadow. We created machines that could mimic our voices, finish our sentences, speak for us. We let algorithms shape language, politics, even love. And somewhere along the line, we stopped listening. Maybe we silenced ourselves long before the silence began. Maybe this is what happens when speech becomes noise and meaning disappears. But if silence is a consequence, what was the sin? And if this is evolution, why does it feel like extinction? In the vacuum left by silence, something else began to grow. It started slowly, changes in behavior, cognition, even perception. Deprived of voice, people turned inward. Thought patterns rewired. Communication evolved not just through writing or gestures, but through something subtler. Collective intuition. Emotional resonance. Some claimed they could feel what others meant. Entire communities developed synchronized habits, acting in eerie unison without a single word exchanged. Scientists called it neuroempathic alignment. But others called it something else, the second species. Children born after the silence displayed unusual brain activity. Regions once associated with speech were now hyperactive in abstract processing and pattern recognition. They learned faster, reacted quicker. Some could anticipate movement before it happened. They didn't speak. They never tried to. And they seemed perfectly content. Humanity was splitting. Those who remembered the voice clung desperately to old systems, laws, nations, institutions. But they were crumbling. Voice-based security, legal testimony, even education, all obsolete. Power shifted to the silent-born, a new elite without need for words. And with each generation, the gap widened. Earth itself began to change. Animal communication grew erratic. Ocean mammals fell silent. Birds stopped singing in entire regions. Something was rewriting not just us, but the biosphere. Scientists warned of an evolutionary cascade, one that couldn't be reversed. But governments, fractured and voiceless, had no tools left to respond. Some rebelled, others submitted, but most simply adapted. In time, the question was no longer how do we get our voices back, but should we? Because the world that emerged from the silence functioned. It pulsed with new order, different, efficient, emotionless. And in that stillness, those who once ruled with words now found themselves irrelevant, forgotten. And the ones who could never speak were finally leading. In the aftermath of silence, when the chaos had settled and a new kind of order began to take root, humanity stood before a question no one dared to ask out loud: if we could bring speech back, should we? What had once defined us now felt distant, even dangerous. The voice was power, yes, but also deception, manipulation, division. Wars were declared with it. Lies were built on it. Entire systems of control depended on noise. But silence, had exposed something else. Beneath the absence of sound, there was clarity, focus, a terrifying kind of peace. Those who had never spoken were thriving, not just surviving, but transcending. The old world, the speaking world, looked primitive in comparison. And now, a decision loomed. Deep beneath the earth, in the vaults of forgotten laboratories, engineers had built a prototype, the Reclaimer, a device capable of overriding the silence and restoring the voice at a global scale. But to activate it would mean unraveling everything that had evolved since the event. It would mean returning to the noise, to politics, to conflict, to chaos. Some argued it was our right. Others warned it would destroy the balance that had emerged. So the final dilemma remains, was speech a gift or a weapon? Is silence oppression or evolution? In the end, no one spoke. The prototype was left untouched, sealed away. And as generations passed, its purpose faded from memory. Only a handful still knew what it was and what it could do. They called it the last voice, waiting in the dark, not to be heard, but to be chosen. Do you remember that question? The one we asked at the very beginning. What if one day, every human on Earth lost the ability to speak? Back then, it sounded like a mystery, a tragedy. But now, maybe it was something else entirely. Maybe it wasn't taken from us. Maybe we gave it up, out of exhaustion, out of fear, or out of some deep, collective instinct we didn't fully understand. And if that's true, what does that say about us? About what we were becoming? I think about it sometimes, what it felt like, that final moment before silence. The last word someone said, the last laugh, the final scream that never echoed. What would you say if you knew it would be your last word forever? Would it be worth remembering? Or would you let it go? Because that's the real weight of this story. It's not about the silence. It's about what it left behind. The empty space where sound used to be is still here, around us, inside us. And whether we fill it again or choose to listen to it, that choice might be closer than we think, maybe even in our lifetime. So tell me, would you press the button? Would you bring the voice back, knowing what it could unleash? Or has silence shown us who we really are when the noise is gone? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you believe. Because sometimes, the scariest part of the story isn't what happens. It's what comes next. And maybe, just maybe, the silence was never the end. Maybe it was a question waiting for our answer.